in return for our innocent little girls who were kidnapped on the 7th of October. We're releasing terrorists like Mohammed Abu Varda. Nobody knows the name. Nobody's ever heard of him. Mohammed Abu Varda is serving 48 life sentences for 48 people that he murdered in a series of terrorist attacks through the mid-1990s after the Oslo Accords were already agreed. We're talking about people like Tabat Mardawi from Palestinian Islamic Jihad, who was responsible for the murder of 21 people in a suicide bombing. Majdi Zaatri, another one who planned and led a suicide bomber to a bus in Jerusalem that then exploded, murdering 23 people, including 8 children, 2 babies. Fahmi and Ramadan Mashara, 2 brothers who planned and executed a suicide bombing on another bus in Jerusalem, murdering 19 people. We're really talking about mass murderers of a scale that we haven't seen. And not only are we talking about Israeli victims only, we're talking about international victims. We're talking about people like Ashak Arafeh, who murdered a British citizen, Mary Jane Gardner, in 2011. We're talking about Wael Qasim and Abbasi, who were responsible for 35 different murders, including the attacks in the Hebrew University, in which a number of American citizens were also murdered, in Cafe Moment as well. So we're really talking about mass murderers who came to commit terrorism in the name of terrorism. They didn't really care who they were killing. They killed everybody.
Israel and Hamas have agreed to a ceasefire hostage release deal, ending the 15 months of war in Gaza. Now, in the first phase of this deal, which is supposed to last some 42 days, a total of 33 hostages will be released in exchange for over 700 Palestinian prisoners. Among the prominent names are many terrorists, murderers, rapists, and senior Hamas leaders who have blood on their hands. In the second phase of the deal, which has yet to be negotiated and secured, Israel will release hundreds more terrorists in exchange for the remaining 60-something hostages. Now, to get some better insight on the significance of the release of these hostages, I'm joined in studio today by Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Maurice Hirsch. He's a researcher here at the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs, and he's the former director of the military prosecution for Judea and Samaria. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Obviously, many Israelis are concerned, especially given the fact that some 80% of the terrorists that were released as part of the Gilad Shalit deal returned to terror, and that's including, obviously, none other than Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas. He needs no introduction. But my question to you, Maurice, is where will these terrorists be released to?
So we have to differentiate between the two groups. There's actually 2 parts to the current agreement. One is the release of 737 terrorists, not all of them murderers, hundreds of them murderers, and another 1,167 Gazans who had been arrested during the operations on the ground in the last 15 months. So of that group, they're going back to Gaza. Of the 737, some of them are being released back to Judea and Samaria. Some of them were Gazans to start with. They're being released back to Gaza. Some of them are going to be deported. We don't know exactly yet to where they'll be deported. There's been discussions of Turkey, of Qatar. So that's already the next group. And then there's a group of these terrorists who are being released back into Israel as delineated by the 1949 Armistice Agreement, what's commonly referred to as the Green Line. They were Israeli residents or citizens when they carried out the attacks. They're now being released and will go back to live in Israel. People like Majdi Zaatri, who I mentioned before, who murdered 23 people. He can now go back, just to understand the heinous nature of this event. He can now go back to the scene of the bombing, make a TikTok video of himself laughing, dancing on the blood of the victims, and we can do nothing to him.
Because he's an Israeli citizen.
Because he's an Israeli, holds Israeli residency, and he's now being let back into Israel. He used his Israeli residency as a means to really infiltrate Israel with the suicide bomber. It helped him. Israeli residents and citizens have free access to everywhere in the country. And so that very much helped them to bring the terrorists into Jerusalem and into Tel Aviv and around the country to carry out the attacks.
Now, Maurice, while these terrorists were in Israeli prisons, they and their families were receiving a monthly stipend, a financial stipend from the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. Now, explain to us this policy, this pay-for-slay policy by the Palestinian Authority.
So the way the pay-for-slay policy works is like this. In 2004, the Palestinian Authority passed a law. It's not just some type of arbitrary idea. It's an entrenched law in the Palestinian Authority, which says that all of the terrorists arrested by Israel, and they say all of the terrorists, and we have to understand it. It doesn't matter whether they belong to Fatah, whether they belong to Hamas, whether they belong to Palestinian Islamic Jihad or the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. All of the Palestinian terrorists are covered by the Palestinian law. They are recognized as the fighting sector of the Palestinian people, and there is a commitment from the Palestinian Authority entrenched in the law to then provide for those terrorists. Now, that divides up into a whole different scale of different ways that the Palestinian Authority rewards them for their terrorism. The most prominent, obviously, being the payment of monthly salaries. Once a terrorist is arrested, a Palestinian terrorist is arrested for participating in acts against the occupation, as they define it, he is then entitled to a monthly salary for any time that he spends in jail. The salary goes up over time that you spend in jail. So you start off with a basic salary of 1,400 shekel a month that goes up after 3 years to 2,000 shekel, after 5 years to 4,000 shekel, and so on and so forth until you get to 12,000 shekels a month. Now, we have to put that a little bit into proportion. The average, the minimum salary in the Palestinian Authority is 1,450 shekel. So if you have to work for a month or if you're involved in terrorism, it's obvious that that's the incitement to go and participate in terror.
Right. This is no small fee. We're talking about at least $400 here.
We're talking about a lot of money.
Yeah.
There are no needs-based criteria. The Palestinian Authority tries to sometimes explain, well, this is a social welfare project. It's not. And I had the representative of the Palestinian Authority in court, and I cross-examined him, and I asked him specifically, are there any needs-based criteria for this system? His answer was no. So if a rich terrorist carries out a murder or a impoverished terrorist carries out a murder, will they receive the same payment? The answer is yes. That's his words. That's how the system works. And it acts as a direct incentive for people to participate in terror. People like, if we take again, Majdi Zaatri, these people who have been in jail for now almost 20 years, they've been paid over 1 million shekel, about $350,000, simply for murdering Jews. That's an unbelievable figure. And it's something which now they're being released, they'll go home, they're rich. Now, Majdi Zaatri and Fahmy and Ramadan Mashara are in and of themselves unique cases. Within the pay-for-slay policy, there's not only the basic salary that's paid to the Palestinian terrorists, there's a special addition that's paid to Israeli Arab terrorists. They are specifically incentivized to use their Israeli residency or their Israeli citizenship to participate in terror and receive a compensation from the Palestinian Authority specifically for that. So each one of these terrorists will receive an extra 300 shekel for being an Israeli citizen or resident. Not only that, the Palestinian Authority also deposits every month for the terrorists in jail an extra 400 shekel that they can use in the canteen of the prison. So really, when you take into account the whole package, which then also provides for free education while you're in prison, education for your family members, the entire package, if you're going for a job interview and looking, well, do they pay dental? Do they pay welfare? Do they pay medical bills? To be a Palestinian terrorist, you've won the lottery. You've literally won the lottery. Everything is taken care of for you and for your family members.
I understand the Red Cross also has a role in this.
Without question. The Red Cross, the Palestinian Authority, obviously needs to have some type of access to the terrorists who have been arrested and to sign them up on a power of attorney. The terrorist is now in jail. where do you then deposit the money that he's about to be paid? So the Red Cross people meet with the terrorists at the start of their arrest, and they sign them up on the power of attorney, which then the Palestinian Authority uses in order to pay the salaries. Now,
so essentially facilitating this incentivization to carry out terror.
100%. The Red Cross it really is an intrinsic part of this whole process, but it's worse than that, Sarah. The Red Cross is not meant to be doing this or providing this service. It's not one of the services that they're meant to be providing as part of the Geneva Accords. They are providing the service of their own free will. I wrote about this almost 6 years ago after discussion and correspondence with the Red Cross, and they said, we're doing this voluntarily. We have no obligation to do it. So I said to them, well, why are you doing it? Why are you participating in this pay-for-slay policy? And the answer was, because we can.
Maurice, in 2016, an American citizen, Taylor Force, who was a West Point graduate, a veteran of tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, he was murdered by a Palestinian terrorist while walking alongside the beachside promenade in Tel Aviv. He was in Israel as part of a university group trip, examining global entrepreneurship. Tell me about how Congress reacted and the legislation that they passed in reaction to that.
So before we get to Congress, we have to take Taylor's family into consideration, Stuart and his wife, and Taylor's friends. Taylor's really the soldiers that he served with and the officers that he served with got together and pushed Congress to enact the Taylor Force Act. What the Taylor Force Act says is like this. Firstly, the finding of Congress that the payment of these salaries to the terrorists incentivizes terrorism. Basic provision, very, very clear. The Taylor Force Act then says that any U.S. direct assistance to the Palestinian Authority will be conditional upon abolishing the entire pay-for-slay policy, not only the payment of salaries to terrorists in prison, but also the payment of stipends to the families of dead terrorists. It's not only if you're in prison that you get rewarded. If one of your family members goes and carries out a suicide attack and he's killed, their family is then paid by the Palestinian Authority, by the Palestine Liberation Organization, also a monthly stipend and a reward for their participation in terror. So the Taylor Force Act said, you know what, there's a carrot and there's a stick. The US had until then been providing the Palestinian Authority with somewhere in the region of $250 million a year in direct aid. And they said to the Palestinian Authority, choose life or choose death.
And this was back in 2016. We're now in 2025.
So that was passed. It was finally passed in 2018. And the Palestinian Authority rejected it. Famously, Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority, responded to Congress saying that if I am left with just 1 penny in the coffers of the Palestinian Authority, I will pay them first to the terrorists and not to anything else. That's how Mahmoud Abbas responded. And so now here we are, 6 years later. In the interim period, that money has been partially, the US aid to the Palestinian Authority has been partially halted. I'll explain why I say partially in a second. Has been partially halted, but the Palestinian Authority has continued on paying these salaries. Now, according to the Israeli Ministry of Defense, it's somewhere in the region of 600 to 650 million shekels a year, 150 to 175 million dollars a year that the Palestinian Authority is paying to terrorists. By doing that, they're not only losing the money that they're paying and incentivizing terrorism, but they're also losing the direct support from the US government. So if you take those together, they're losing somewhere in the region of $350 to $400 million a year.
That could go to hospitals, universities, to Palestinian people.
To the needy people, to industry, to providing jobs for the Palestinians, to providing anything, welfare to those truly in need. And yet, Mahmoud Abbas's statement isn't something just out there as a general idea. It's the policy of the Palestinian Authority that they enact day after day after day.
So the Israeli Knesset also adopted a legislation to penalize the Palestinian Authority for its policy of payments for terrorists. How does that work?
So what happened is after the passage of the Taylor Force Act, we in Israel were already discussing similar legislation. The Israeli legislation passed in July 2018 says that at the end of every year, the Israeli Ministry of Defense will provide the Security Cabinet with a report detailing the Palestinian Authority's payments to terrorists in the previous year. Once that report is approved, Israel then starts deducting that sum from the taxes we collect and pass the Palestinian Authority as a result of the Oslo Accords. Open brackets there. What happened in the Oslo Accords? Israel agreed to waive billions of dollars of taxes in favor of the Palestinian Authority. We thought we were buying peace, but actually what we were doing was buying murder. Out of every 100 shekel that the Palestinian Authority pays to the terrorists, Israel provides them with 65 shekel of that sum based on the Oslo Accords.
Maurice, as the Trump administration finally steps into office, amidst these negotiations for the second phase of this ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas, one of the biggest ticking points is reforming the Palestinian Authority, and of course this pay-for-slay policy, which I'm sure is very much unknown to many Americans, will have to be first up on the list.
Without question, dealing with the pay-for-slay policy has to be one of really the top agenda points for the Trump administration, as long as there's an institutional system of any entity in the world to reward terrorists for murder. You can't discuss any type of peace with that type of organization. And so that has to be on the top of the agenda. But also not only dealing with Taylor Force. Taylor Force needs, the Taylor Force Act, unfortunately, needs to be amended. I say unfortunately because under the Biden administration, they managed to find a loophole. If I said before that the Taylor Force Act prevents or conditions direct aid to the Palestinian Authority from the US government, what the Biden administration did was to say, well, we have this alternative source of funding. It's called USAID. That provides development aid around the world. And so what they did was really, they betrayed the spirit of the law of Taylor Force. I would say they betrayed Taylor's memory in general. And they said, instead of giving the money directly to the Palestinian Authority, we're going to now carry out projects on behalf of the Palestinian Authority via USAID. And so we saw hundreds of millions of dollars being given by the US administration under the Biden administration for the benefit really of the Palestinian Authority. Because when the Palestinian in the street sees that a road is being laid, he doesn't care whether the money came as direct aid to the Palestinian Authority or through USAID. He sees that the Palestinian Authority is providing for his needs. And so we have to really tighten, to a certain extent, the provisions of the Taylor Force Act to ensure that we're not really betraying the spirit of the law, betraying Taylor's memory, and saying all of the aid to the Palestinians, whether it's direct or indirect, is going to be conditional upon entirely abolishing the pay-for-slay policy.
Maurice Hirsch, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you very much.